uh, Wonderstruck. Hi, I'm Brian Selznick, the author and illustrator of The Marvels. I grew up drawing all the time, and I love art, and I've always taken art classes and sketched whenever I could. And after college, I decided to try to get into children's books. And the thing that I find the most exciting about children's books is the way the words and pictures work together in a book, the way that pictures can help tell a story, and what happens when the words and the pictures are combined in unusual and exciting ways. I think splitting a narrative into two stories sometimes can help underline connections between things. So when you have two stories, what's exciting, I think, for the reader is discovering what the connections are between those two worlds. Because I'm always very interested in how we are connected to the world and how we make connections through our lives. And so both of those books are very much about how people in the stories make connections and then how the reader makes connections between the stories. I think that looking at the way the arts have been used to express people's feelings and the way that we are able to use different forms of art to say who we are as human beings is really fascinating. And then we in the audience go because we want to see ourselves reflected back in a way. We want to learn about people who are different than ourselves. So we both can see ourselves reflected in the arts, and we can learn about people who we may not otherwise get a chance to meet. I'm a bookmaker. I love books, and I love the fact that you open a book and you turn the pages, and that's the technology of a book. It's a kind of machine. It's a machine for telling stories. And it's a very simple machine. All it can do is open and then have pages that turn. But within that technology, you can go anywhere, you can tell any kind of story, and you can use words and pictures, which are the main things that I'm most interested in. I think the fact that the books themselves, even though they're designed to be books, are very cinematic because they're very highly illustrated. They're inspired by cinema. I'm distantly related to David O. Selznick, who made Gone with the Wind and King Kong. And so I've always felt a connection to the cinema. And so I love seeing how movies can tell a story with the camera and how they can tell a story visually. One of my favorites is The Wizard of Oz, which I think has one of the greatest moments in all of cinema history, which is the moment when Dorothy opens the door from her house in Kansas after the tornado, and the world is black and white. The movie, of course, as everyone knows, begins in black and white. And then she opens the door, and through the door, we can see the color world of Oz. And everything becomes Technicolor when she steps through that door. And I think that moment of going from the black and white world of Kansas into the colorful, the Technicolor world of Oz is one of the great moments in cinema history. I got to write the screenplay for the movie of Wonderstruck, and it was my first screenplay that I ever had written. I got to read the screenplay for Hugo. I got to visit the set when Martin Scorsese was filming, so I learned a lot just from walking around and seeing how he was making the movie, seeing how John Logan, who wrote the screenplay for Hugo, adapted my story, seeing what he changed, seeing what he kept the same. And so when it was time to write the screenplay for Wonderstruck, I felt like I had really learned a lot from that experience. But of course, in the book, the story of Rose in 1927 is told entirely with drawings, And the story of Ben in 1977 is told entirely with words. And I knew I couldn't do that in a movie, so I had the idea to tell the story of Rose like a black and white silent movie made in 1927, and then Ben's story would be told like a color movie that was made in the 70s. And then Todd took that and made it happen. Yes, I have a producer who is going to produce the movie of the Marvels. I have a script already that I've written, and we're looking for a director. Yeah, so if you know anybody, please let me know. I used to read books by Ray Bradbury all the time. He wrote science fiction fantasy stories that I really loved. One of his most famous books was called The Martian Chronicles. He also wrote a book called The Illustrated Man, which is about a man who was covered in tattoos, and each of the tattoos begins to move and tells a story. And so that was a favorite of mine. And I also read a lot of Stephen King when I was in high school. I read The Shining, which I really loved, The Stand, which terrified me. And so a lot of scary books when I was in high school. Maybe because it was scary. Maybe it was a scary time. Because we have things in real life that are scary, and I think sometimes a scary book can help us grapple with that fear. So many people and animals. A day with, like Babar would be very, very exciting, very fun. Or Curious George. Do you have Curious George here, the little Le Petit Singe, who's very, very popular in America. Or Max from Where the Wild Things Are. Although you'd probably get into a lot of trouble if you were hanging out with Max all day. One of my favorite books is The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett, and meeting the characters from that book, but of course then I'd also want to I'd want them to show me the secret garden. I'd want them, I'd hope that they'd be able to give me a little tour of the gardens and the place where they live, because that's the other thing too, is when you're reading, the characters become so real to you and the places become so real that the thought of being able to go with the characters to the places that they know so well would be really fantastic. Well, I'm working on a new book that is going to also be illustrated and have many words like these books. It's a secret right now what it's about, but I've got a story, I've got the setting, I've got the general arc of the plot. I'm working on a musical adaptation of my first book, The Houdini Box in English. And so I'm working on a musical version of that, where I'm writing the lyrics for the songs and writing the story for the play. And so that's been very challenging and very exciting. And my husband and I wrote a book together that I illustrated that's coming out in March in America, and hopefully soon after that in France. It's another book with a little monkey called Baby Monkey Private Eye. So Bébé Singe Détective Privé. And so it's about a little monkey who solves crimes. And in the book, solving crimes is very easy for the little monkey, but he has a very difficult time putting on his pants. And so most of the book is him trying to get his pants on. But one of the great things about writing books is I sit in my house, mostly alone, for 3 years, writing and drawing, and then I send these stories out into the world. And so the characters who I make up go to places I've never been, and they speak languages I can't speak, and they meet people who I never meet. And so it's really exciting for me to then go and travel and meet everyone. But of course, one of the things I love about what I do is I get to write stories about things that I love. First, the main thing is I just want you to like the story. I'm not trying to teach a lesson. I'm not trying to make you learn anything. I'm just trying to tell a story about characters who I care about. But I like the idea that if you are moved by the story or intrigued by elements in the book, that in the back of each of my books, I explain everything from the book that was true. And then I often will point you in directions so that you can learn more if you want. So whenever I do hear from a reader who tells me that they went to London to visit the Dennis Seaver's house, which was one of the inspirations for the Marvels, or they went to a museum because they read Wonderstruck and were intrigued by the dioramas and about the way museums are put together, the way they work, or they watched an old silent movie which they had never seen before, it makes me very, very happy.